Welcome to our guest lecture by Hannibal Mike Ware. Inspector General Ware is the presidentially appointed and Senate confirmed Inspector General of the United States Small Business Administration. He was sworn in as Inspector General on May 24th, 2018, following his confirmation by the United States Senate. He is responsible for independent oversight of SBA's programs and operations, which normally encompass more than $100 billion in guaranteed loans and nearly $100 billion in federal contracting. However, as a result of the national pandemic response, Inspector General Ware is currently providing oversight over more than $1 trillion of lending authority aimed at stabilizing the nation's economy and providing vital capital to our nation's small business. He is also a statutory member of the Council of Inspector Generals on Integrity and Efficiency, which is called SIGGI's Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. And he serves alongside his Inspector General colleagues to provide a whole government response to pandemic oversight efforts. Within the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, Inspector General Ware chairs the subcommittee on audits. In addition, Inspector General Ware serves as the chair of the Audit Committee for SIGGI and is a member of SIGGI's Executive Council. Prior to his appointment as the Inspector General, Mr. Ware served as the Deputy Inspector General of the SBA and the Acting Inspector General. But prior to being at the SBA, and it's a connection that he and I share, Inspector General Ware spent the first 26 years of his career at the United States Department of Interior Office of Inspector General. He started his career in 1990 when he joined the Department of Interior Inspector General's office in the Virgin Islands, which is where he is from. And he started as an auditor and later became a field office supervisor. Mr. Ware has a degree from the University of the Virgin Islands in accounting, and he is a native of the U.S. Virgin Islands. I would like you all to extend a welcome to Inspector General Ware, who has taken the time out of his day to talk to us. I also want to just note very briefly that the reason we're having this event this week is this is International Fraud Awareness Week, or what we call Fraud Week. This is the 20th anniversary of Fraud Week. It was created by the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, of which I am a member and of which Inspector General Ware is a member. And as we were talking about right before we started recording, Inspector General Ware has actually been nominated and is currently, the balloting is going on to become a member of the Board of Regents of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. So if he is selected by the membership of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, he will be a member of the group that is probably the leading anti-fraud group in the world. So with no further ado, let me welcome Inspector General Ware to this guest lecture here at Perdue School of Business. Thank you for joining us.
David, thank you. Thank you for having me. I know that learning in this virtual environment must be quite an adjustment for you. But I've heard that you're all up to the challenge, and our new normal has long been here. So fraud and forensic accountants and investigators will have to be more nimble in terms of auditing and investigating in a virtual environment anyway. So this is great grounds for that. But we are all in the community, in the IG community. And when I speak about that, David mentioned SIGGI. This is, the Council of Inspector General for Integrity and Efficiency. And there are, I'll get into that, but I don't know if you know, but there are like 75 IGs. Less than half of us are presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed. The others we call DFEs, which are designated federal entities. So they have boards. I'll give you an example, like FDIC, or the Federal Reserve Board.
Or where I was, the SEC. So
right.
Yep.
Precisely. So I mean, there's a whole bunch of us, but SIGGI is the council that encompasses us all. So SIGGI is the governing body for all our professional standards, for audits and investigations, keeps our integrity in check through the Integrity Committee, and is responsible for professional development across the IG community. So, when we get together, that's a beautiful thing, once a month. Imagine 75 people who have full independence and authority getting in a room to discuss what direction we should move in. I would guess that's sort of like Congress, 500 and something people in the House. How do you come to consensus? Not easily, right? But we're looking for skill set like yours, because as the fraudsters evolve, so must we. So I'm here tonight to give you what I hope would be some real life, as in it's going on right now, feel for what the IG and other law enforcement communities are dealing with in terms of providing pandemic oversight stemming from the CARES Act, primarily through my office's leadership posture in providing that oversight. And I'll leave room for questions, and I'll try my best to ensure that you have a little extra time between classes tonight. But before we get started, I thought it would be important to tell you a little bit more about me, if for no other reason than to build some kind of credibility. Who is this guy? Well, this guy has been a part of the Federal Inspector General community for over 30 years. Yes, that means I started at 5. I started as low down on the federal pay scale as you can possibly get, the GS scale. I started as a GS4. I don't know if you know, but it goes from 1 to 15. And rarely anybody starts at a 1, 2, or 3, although I do know of one person. And she actually works for us. She's our head of audits. But that's you got to be in high school or something. But I started as a GS4 student auditor. And I later took over the leadership of the office in which I was hired as a student auditor. And then I took over the entire Eastern region of the Department of Interior's Audit Division, which was responsible for the office in which I was hired as a GS4. And I later rose through the ranks of the senior executive service before receiving a very unsuspecting, I would call it, call from the White House inquiring about my interest in this position. Unsuspecting because I just explained to you that I am a career guy. I know nobody in the White House or anywhere else of any type of political influence. Nobody, right? So that'd be very surprising to sit there, and that's frankly based solely on the merit of your work. Somebody somewhere knew that Mike Ware was doing something that should be rewarded, I guess. But I don't know if you know how that works, but there's an extensive vetting process that happens. And after that, I was confirmed by the United States Senate as the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration. A career of conducting forensic accounting and fighting fraud on all levels. But I was talking to David earlier, and I don't want to continue our discussion on the Inspector General community under the assumption that everybody knows everything about federal inspectors general, which is the weirdest pluralization of a word, of some words ever. It's inspectors general, not inspector generals. But I have a strong feeling you do, but just in case, I'm gonna give you a very, very quick IG 101 crash course. You ready? You may have heard more about what we do in light of the pandemic since it started. But not everyone has an idea of what we do. And as a matter of fact, I go to parties, to get-togethers, to anywhere. Nobody knows what we do. But I could tell you this, I know I'm biased, but I believe that the Office of Inspector General, which we all call the OIG, is the best gig in the federal government. And here's why. Well, first of all, we get to tell everyone what to do. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We kind of do, but I'm kidding. Great oversight begins with solid partnerships at all levels of government. Let's get that straight. And as a matter of fact, everything is better with solid partnerships when you think about it, right? But that being said, the purpose of all IGs, remember 75 or so of us, is to keep both our agency heads and the Congress fully and currently informed. And although our individual missions vary slightly based on the agencies where we're independently housed, our missions are essentially to provide independent, objective oversight. And I've said this so many times, it's like by heart, right? To improve the integrity, accountability, and performance of our home agencies, and of course, to ferret out fraud, waste, and abuse. Whether it's SBA OIG, the Department of Justice OIG, Education's OIG, HUD, Defense, you name it, SEC, FDIC, whoever. That's basically what we all do. Now, SBA's Office of Inspector General is one of the original 12 IGs established over 40 years ago with the Inspector General Act of 1978, which I always like to say that every time I present because it was shocking to me that SBA was one of the original 12. So I have a staff of auditors, evaluators, analysts, criminal investigators, attorneys, and I'm probably leaving out some stuff, but we're located in 13 different places across the nation to execute that mission. And that's a little look of our org chart. We have, when you see like Eastern region, Central region, Western, Eastern is headquartered in DC. Central is headquartered in Houston. As a matter of fact, Eastern is currently headquartered in DC. Before it was in Atlanta. We just made that switch. And Western is headquartered in Seattle. So we have, and then we have a bunch of field offices under those regions. But the main thing to know about us is that we have statutory guarantees of independence to include our budget and to include personnel authorities. And that was, of course, to ensure the objectivity of our work and to safeguard against efforts to compromise that objectivity and independence. It's those guarantees that make statutory IGs unique.
Just if I can just give a quick example, because I was at a designated entity. So
right.
Students, just so what we're talking about. So for example, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, we were on the same email server with management. We didn't have our own email. We didn't have our own website. We had to rely on human resources from the SEC to do what we wanted to do, but we were also tasked with auditing and investigating human resources. You guys could see how that might be a conflict, right? So what Mike is describing is as one of the statutory, presidentially appointed, in order to have the independence and objectivity they need, they have to be separate and distinct from the entity that they're examining and auditing.
This is true, David, but several of us still rely on the agency servers, but we have a carved out place in every one of those locations that you're talking about that has an incredible encryption and incredible levels of audit trail. So we've never been tested in terms of that. The big thing there is budget though. We have full power over our budget. Matter of fact, we don't even go through the parent agency to deal with OMB. We deal with the Office of Management and Budget relative to our budget requirements on our own. As a matter of fact, when we've gotten from the White House across government executive branch, everybody is supposed to put in at least a 5% cut this year. I've thrown that to the winds. I've asked for a 30% increase for 2021 and actually got it because of this, right? Because of what's going on. But yeah, that's part of it that makes us unique. But the weird part of it is that we're housed in the executive branch of government, but we report to the legislative branch of government, right? And I don't want to bore you down with the whole history of this, but I know in the history, that was one of the most difficult things that almost did not have the Inspector General Act pass. Jimmy Carter almost did not sign that because of that dynamic. Basically, he said, we basically have spies for the legislative branch within our executive branch of government. The problem was Watergate, of course, and President Carter had run on a platform of transparency. So difficult for him not to sign it. Nonetheless, all of these things that we just talked about, David and I, are in line with the stated purpose of the IG Act, right? Which was to create independent and objective units within each agency whose singular duty is to combat waste, fraud, and abuse in the programs and operations of those agencies. And that, my friends, is IG Crash Course 101. So let me get to pandemic oversight for you, because this is a big thing. You read it in the news, you see it on the evening news, you see all of this. So let me set the stage for you a little bit. You were told at the very beginning during the introduction that we are normally responsible for $100 billion in government guaranteed lending and over $100 billion in government contracting programs. So you could get from that even during normal times, we have a pretty full plate. The pandemic, though, has the plate more than overflowing. And you've heard when David made the introduction, you've seen in the news, SBA is executing over $1 trillion of PPP, which is the Payment Protection Program, the Paycheck Protection Program, and EIDL Lending Authority. And EIDL is Economic Injury Disaster Loans Lending. And I'll tell you more about those two in a minute. But when I refer to PPP, that's what I'm talking about. And when I refer to EIDL, that's what I'm talking about. Because all those things are a huge mouthful. For me to be saying that over and over would be ludicrous. So anyway, but over $1 trillion to mitigate the economic damage to the nation resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. So what's a couple $100 billion to $1 trillion, right? It's like nothing. And it has been a truly daunting task, to be honest. And, but, folks always ask, how did you get to $1 trillion in lending authority? And let me go to the next slide and I'll show you how. What we're talking about in terms of dollars, guys, is truly unprecedented in terms of lending when you see the breakdown, right? So in the first round of the CARES Act funding, SBA had $349 billion for the PPP. And you guys know that money was done in like 14 days, 2 weeks, money, poof, gone. So they needed a second round of CARES Act funding. And that was another $310 billion. Guys, this is with a B. And then the EIDL Lending Authority was pushed to $373 billion. So that's how we come to the over $1 trillion in lending authority. So when I say unprecedented amount of oversight, it really is. Right now, we're charged with providing oversight of this. And if the task of executing that much money is unprecedented for SBA, it's equally unprecedented for my office to have this level of oversight, right? And let me stay here at this point. At the onset, neither SBA nor the Office of Inspector General had additional people to deal with this, right? We were each given additional funding to be able to ramp up for it, but there's no way we could ramp up before the money was flying out the door. It's just not possible in terms of how we hire in the federal government. It's just simply not. They didn't say, we relax all the Office of Personnel Management rules for you and you could direct hire folks. Otherwise, I would have grabbed a handful of you guys and put you straight to work. But, the thing is, we never panicked, right? I knew that our team could handle what was coming our way because we are the true resident experts when it comes to SBA's programs. And we rallied around that expertise. We brought our internal thought leaders to the table and we planned ahead. As soon as we heard the rumor that it was coming, we started our planning immediately. And, that was so that we wanted to get very quick and very relevant information to SBA before they issued the first loan so that they could set up the type of controls that we've been telling them for decades needed to be put in place, which may work just a little bit because you were dealing with a smaller capacity of things. But what does $1 trillion do? It magnifies every single control flaw you've ever had. And that's what we were finding. Any questions on that so far?
Yeah, I had one question. You mentioned over 1 trillion in lending. Where are you actually, or where I guess is the government getting the money for all this? And I know it's mostly from taxes, or I'm not really sure.
And just so you know, it's appropriate that Ryan is asking this. I happen to know Ryan is a finance major rather than an accounting major. Yeah. So this is exactly what I would expect a finance major to ask. So,
Ryan, that's your money and your parents' money. These are taxpayer dollars, right? These money comes from Treasury in one way, shape, or form. And I'll explain how PPP works in terms of how the lenders get into it, and how for the disaster lending programs, it's direct lending from the Small Business Administration, which is definitely straight up from the Treasury, right? So with that amount of money, that amount of oversight responsibility, there is no Office of Inspector General that can handle the full breadth of what we're facing alone. I recognize that quickly. And that's why I championed the whole of government approach to oversight by immediately partnering with other IGs, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, of which, of course, I'm a statutory member, and law enforcement entities across the nation, including the Department of Justice. All these plans were set up before the first loan went out the door. It was important because all of us knew what was coming, especially to SBA. We got the most money than HHS, right? So we knew we had to partner up quickly to get this done. And keeping in mind, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I'm speaking about the economic part. There's a health part, and almost all of us are at home. So we're working remotely. And for many of them in the intelligence IGs, in the intelligence communities, they basically had nothing to do at home because you can't take the files out of those secure facilities. And you can't access the networks either from outside.
We're having the same, I think I shared this with you in an email, but we're having the same challenge now because we have a brand new experiential program where our fraud students are working on real criminal investigations. I know it's not classified information. I don't mean it's like that, but we're concerned, obviously, when you think of the PII that you would have in a criminal investigation, medical files, bank records, tax records, we can't let our students have that remotely either. And we're in the Zoom environment. So we've been struggling with how to secure the data to allow them to effectively investigate while being at home without having the infrastructure that the government has. But what Mike is talking about, students, just so you understand, is that intelligence agencies work in what are called SCIFs, which are called specially compartmentalized information facilities, where it prevents wiretapping, eavesdropping, the kinds of things where foreign spies can spy on us. And so they are not allowed to take their files home. It's not even about PII. And how are they supposed to do their oversight role when they can't even be at the office? And how is SBA supposed to do it when they've got sensitive information of all these consumers? I mean, millions and millions of Americans that applied for these loans.
Right. But this is, like David was saying, this is where I want to make a connection for you between what we do and what you're currently learning. Because this is where your skill set comes into play. There's tons of data out there, as you can imagine, right? We're just talking about this. And the utilization of data analytics is extremely valuable. And it's a major part of why we've been able to move as quickly as we have in terms of oversight. It's paid huge dividends for us on the fraud front. But there's a but there. We still need people like you who can digest and decipher the trends found in data. We can't have one without the other, or we have an incomplete at best and an accurate at worst picture of what is truly transpiring. We also need your skill sets to provide analytical and empirical ways to build internal control structures that prevent or at least stem the tide of rampant fraud in government programs. And it's something that I always talk about, right? It's important for folks to understand that fraud prevention starts at the onset of standing up any program. Proper controls have to be in place to mitigate risk and to ensure that the programs operate as intended. In the absence of that at the front, fraudsters thrive, and we get an environment in which we're currently living in right now. So I spoke a little bit about how we developed that plan of approach that revolved around getting the timely information out, right? About the lessons learned. And we were first in the community, first in the nation, as a matter of fact, forget the community, first in the nation to issue any type of reporting on these economic programs that were coming out. These 3 reports went out before the first loan was even issued by SBA.
So just so I understand what they're called and can explain it later, are these management alerts?
There's something like that. So a management alert more meets the mantle of you need, well, actually very similar. But a management alert draws something that's very egregious that needs immediate action, right? Draws that to attention. So it's egregious. We have to stop what we're doing right now to let you know that this is a problem that needs to be fixed right now. This was more of a lessons learned so that they could consider implementing the recommendations in here prior to setting up their full programs. I'll give you an example. I don't know how many of you know, but one of the biggest knocks on the Paycheck Protection Program when it first went out was that folks didn't know how it was working because the interim rules did not go out prior to the money starting to go out, right? And I mean, in SBA's defense, I mean, this is a lot of moving parts and people are desperately in need of funding. These reports said, make sure the rules are in place, get working on the rules right now or it will cause serious confusion. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah. So I don't know if David is part of the class, you maybe not. Take a look here and there at DOJ press releases, but there've been daily press releases detailing our arrests, right?
Yeah, we have not. Generally, we don't look at the press releases in class, but I'm constantly nagging the students to link in with me on LinkedIn, as you are, so
Right.
that's where I tend to forward the DOJ press releases and the news. But go ahead, tell them. So like every day, people are getting locked up.
Particularly from SBA's programs, these economic programs.
And hopefully so your Office of Investigations is probably spearheading a lot of that and then working with U.S. attorneys' offices. Exactly.
And I mean, that's the part that gets all the attention, but a well thought out system of controls goes a long way in mitigating the risk of fraud. And the arrests are back end and reactive, if you will. Controls are proactive. So as a certified fraud examiner, I could assure you that the understanding of that point is critical to any strong control structure. Any questions up to that point?
And I'm going to let people speak in a second, but this piece they all have learned repeatedly that when we look at the fraud triangle, the most cost-effective way to reduce the incidence of fraud is by prevention to begin with, rather than having to chase people around after the fact when the money's already out the door.
You will be shocked at how that point is lost on so many people, particularly when you're balancing against the need of people who businesses are going out, they're going under. Folks can't meet their mortgage. So this money needs to go out. So we have to be able to balance it as well and have an understanding of the need for speed while balancing the need for some type of controls to ensure that fraudsters don't thrive in this environment, right? So after we covered that base in our planning relative to getting these lessons learned out, we knew that it was vital that we issue a fraud alert to the public to prevent people from falling victim to fraudsters. You know, like I said, we're the resident experts in this stuff, and we know what's going to happen anytime a large bunch of money like this moves so quickly, right? And anyway, but we before the first loan went out the door, we informed the public and our stakeholders of these potential fraud and scam schemes that we had known from the other programs that SBA has that are very similar to what they put out there. We had big media engagement and utilized social media platforms to get information out as well. And as I stated before, in anticipation of this wave, we also set up investigative task forces across the country to provide that whole of government approach that I've been championing to the CARES Act oversight. And that was made easier because at SBA, we're accustomed to partnering with other OIGs, particularly as pertains to small business contracting and loan programs, because they touch just about all government. Because the full government, every agency has a statutory percentage of loans or contracts, prime contracts, that's supposed to go to small businesses. So we were doing that, right? And still though, how do you lead that level of oversight, right? And one bite at a time. That's what I'd say. One bite at a time. How we're set up, and that makes it very manageable for us to lead this, is that we have two audit teams co-located in SBA's National Guarantee Purchasing Center. And that's where the 7A loans are processed. 7A loans, the 7A loan program is SBA's flagship lending program. And all that work that's done in those programs are performed by these teams. So they're the resident experts in these things, and they have a tremendous depth of experience relative to the risks and controls in the 7A program. That was how we were able to provide the level of timely and relevant information to our stakeholders in this lending environment, because Congress intended the 7A lending program to be used to get the funds out quickly under the Paycheck Protection Program. Why? Because the nation's banks are the vehicles by which a 7A program, and now PPP, gets the money to small businesses. So since that was already established, it made sense to use it. So the way that works, right, is that SBA guarantees loans to small businesses that are issued by the banks for its programs. And PPP functions in much the same way. We also have a team in Dallas that's co-located with SBA's Disaster Processing and Disbursement Center. That body of reporting always centers on SBA's economic injury disaster lending. So this is just a bigger version of that now. So experts, again, those loans, like I said earlier, are direct loans from SBA and do not involve other lending institutions. So when that money is gone, the money is gone directly from the Treasury. All right. For the Paycheck Protection Program alone, SBA has reported that there were 5.2 million loans approved for $525 billion. There's still approximately 130 or so billion in funds available when the program expired. That's why you see in the news that the Congress is still debating a new stimulus package that would include the authority to use the rest of this 134 billion for small businesses and to add more money to the fray. But just in terms of comparison, right? When we talk about unprecedented, only about, what would it say, $23 billion in 7A loans they had in 2019. And now we're talking 525 billion, right? In the first tranche of funding, which I showed you earlier, I believe it was 300 and something billion dollars. They had processed more loans in 14 days than they had in the last 14 years combined. Now, from the very onset, we recognized that Congress made that very clear to me as well, personal calls, right? They intended for that unprecedented lending authority through the CARES Act to happen rapidly, happen like this. We know why. People are in desperate need. And the lending institutions and SBA sprung in and stepped up to meet those challenges. But I have a question for you. What do you think moving that amount of money in that amount of time comes with? Well, I'm guessing you guessed it. You just don't want to say it. An unprecedented amount of fraudsters looking to defraud the government. And that's just one part of the CARES Act economic equation. Because remember, I told you about EIDL. So check this out. For EIDL, SBA has now approved and distributed more loans for COVID-19 than for all other disasters combined in the agency's history, guys. Then, in terms of what we're dealing with in volumes, look at some of the other disasters that we've had not too long ago. Not too long ago, we had Harvey, Irma, and Maria. SBA dealt with what, 7.4 billion, 145,000 or so loans. Superstorm Sandy, you guys remember that? That was 2.6 billion, 38,000 or so loans. Katrina, Rita, Wilma, Florence, Michael, all those that's listed here, they don't add up. And you full well know those were huge storms. You all know the names of those storms. Add them up, it doesn't even come close to the 169 billion they've approved and distributed already in COVID-19 disaster lending.
In just a couple months.
In just a couple months. And again, major point to make is that they were expected to handle this initially with the exact amount of staff they always had to handle what was normal in terms of workload. Once again, what do you think happens when that much money moves that quickly? Yup, fraudsters lined up at the gate. We started seeing it immediately. I'll show you what our hotline jumped to. Guys, we had a 10,000% increase in our hotline complaints. All right. From March to August alone, 26,000 online complaints, 42,000 phone calls. It's already climbed to over 75,000 complaints. How do we handle that many complaints?
Mike, are you okay if I cite these stats in the article I'm writing?
Yes.
Okay.
Right? How can we handle that many complaints? Not easily. I'll tell you that. A lot of frustrated people out there. What we've done is we came up with a system to triage the most critical ones, leading to faster investigations and analysis of fraud schemes. But I had to reassign internal staff to beef up our hotline capacity. And then I partnered with the PRAC, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee, to utilize more hotline personnel to meet the challenge. Remember that we have the most in the fight in terms of money. Because of our relationships from SIGI and from the PRAC, we always help one another when we're in need. So right now I have 10 additional hotline experts assigned to me from across the IG community, in addition to the reassignments.
Now, I am assuming, based on the way you reference them as hotline experts, they are not answering the phone. Are you guys using a contractor to run the hotline?
They are answering the phone, listening to you, detailing it. Now, we recently made a change in that the phone wig was not working for us. So we made a change. We moved to online only. So there's a message on our thing saying go online, because the complaint is fed directly into our system, which expedites our ability to address these complaints. Right? So look, by just July alone, in addition to these hotline things that I was talking about, we had been, what word would I use? Inundated. That's a good one. With contacts to our investigative field offices across the nation from financial institutions across the nation. We had received, go ahead, David.
So are the banks contacting you through filing SARS, or are they actually just physically calling the field office?
Both.
Because they do, most of these students know what SARS are at this point.
Well, the banks had their own SARS, right? So they're calling us to talk about what they've been finding. So we found them to be pretty good partners with this, right? So we had off the bat more than 5,000 instances of suspected fraud from the banks who received economic injury loan deposits. And some others didn't tell us like how much the number was. They told us in terms of money. 9 of them, just 9 financial institutions reported over $187 million in suspected fraudulent transactions at that time. That number has more than tripled or quadrupled at this point. Let me get you another slide. This was all reported publicly in a management alert. See there, David, this was a little bit different, that we issued to the agency to immediately take action in terms of strengthening their existing controls and creating new ones to mitigate some of the fraud risk we were finding. We couldn't just sit on all this stuff. We were like, we can't do this alone. We need your help here. And since that time, guys, the numbers have exploded. Our latest report on the program, I'm gonna go over some of the findings that we had. Now, like I said, I gave you the context. Idle made billions of dollars of capital available to to provide prompt economic relief to businesses who were affected by COVID-19. That's a fact. But in order to expedite the process, SBA lowered the guardrails, that was from their words, or relaxed internal controls, that's what they meant. And what do you think happened with that? It significantly increased the risk of program fraud. The unprecedented demand for these loans and the equally unprecedented challenges SBA had in responding to the pandemic, combined with the lowered controls, resulted in billions of dollars in potentially fraudulent loans and loans to potentially ineligible businesses. So when we say potential, we know for certain that a lot of this is definitive. We know that because we have the data. Our data analysts are dealing with the data. They can tell the trends. And based on our investigative caseload and the national arrest, where the weaknesses in SBA systems were and where they needed to set up their vulnerabilities that I'm speaking about in this report, we know that much of that is a fact. This is what's happening. What we did in terms of what our analysis showed, right, is like we came up with these buckets that we found through the data trends and through the arrests that we were making and the investigations that we are currently undertaking, that in these areas are where they're coming from. And those were areas that had the bank accounts differed from the original bank accounts listed on the loan applications. One of the major weaknesses that SBA did address once we notified them, long before the management alert, because guys, these management alerts, although they go out quickly, they take a while to put together because we have to do our work to standards, right? So those standards require that things are done. You got to check the fraud environment, the controls, the everything has to be done to standard. But the agency can't sit and wait on information that's this critical until this report becomes public. So I contacted the administrator of the Small Business Administration, the agency head, and called a meeting with her and her executive staff to brief them on what we were finding so that they could shore up controls immediately, not wait until we issue recommendations in a report that goes public. And they did take action on a lot of what we said needed to happen. A lot of the things that we asked them to fix. One of these things was with these bank accounts. The system that they're using is through a subcontractor to process these loans that come in on the direct lending loans from SBA. And a flaw in the control structure was that you could apply with a legitimate bank account, legitimate bank account. And the control was that they check to see whether or not this is a legitimate bank account. That's all they check. Well, it wasn't my bank account. It was Molly's bank account. But they don't know that. Molly has a legitimate bank account. Here's where the flaw was. Once that got through the approval process, before disbursement, the fraudster or anybody else, a legitimate person, was able to go in and then change the bank account number. So the funds then went to green dot accounts or to offshore accounts, foreign accounts, all kinds of stuff because they didn't have that control in place. After we met,
so some of the money, so people are applying, supposedly Americans are applying for relief, and it's getting, and the deposit is now being sent to Timbuktu or wherever.
Yep. Especially the green dot ones. The green dot ones were like, you know what I mean? Those are, you guys know what those are, green dot?
They're you like should tell them. You should tell them. It's they probably understand that it's an MSB type thing, but they probably don't know what exactly it is.
Basically like little debit cards, or so that you could fund anything that's done electronically, things like that. So the money would go to those where there's no way to really track them, right? So that kind of thing. But so there were those that had to do with the differing bank accounts. There were those that had to do with multiple loans being sent to applicants using the same IP addresses. Now there could be a reason why, like maybe a legal firm was doing some work and they have multiple people that they apply on their behalf for, right? That could have happened.
Or they're all sitting in the same dorm room, submitting false applications here at Salisbury or something like that.
I didn't say Salisbury, but that has happened at universities and we've caught it.
Okay, students, now you know that you need to spread out on the campus if you plan to engage in fraud.
Rand is shaking his head a little bit too hard here. This is, Rand, don't do it, Rand, we're gonna get you. So that was one. They had
they know, by the way, they know that because since we've had to deploy our exams online, we're using online proctoring software that looks at the IP address too. So our kids already knew better, but it's because they're trying to circumvent my internal controls rather than your internal controls.
And this is where it starts, David, right here. This is where it starts. But anyway, we found like huge money in the billions in terms of what they were facing. What that has led to is at this point, a 275% increase in investigative activity by our office. When I tell you, our agents are swamped, the auditors are swamped, everybody's swamped. I'm just getting them help and just trying to get them to the finish line of next week, Thanksgiving, where they could have a couple of days off and come back refreshed again. But since March, since it started, we have initiated hundreds of investigations involving complaints of fraud. And like I said, the Department of Justice reporting on that all the time. And I just for fun, we're gonna go over maybe just one, the most recent arrest. Arrest, where I get address, the more recent one. This was just announced. It wasn't yesterday, it was today, right? And this is how it went down. The fraudsters submitted more than 80 fraudulent PPP loan applications. How they do it? They falsified the number of employees. They created some businesses from thin air, falsified the number of employees, the average monthly payroll expenses, and the monthly business information, things that you would need to apply for the loan, right? They falsified all that. Now, to support the fraudulent loan applications, they then, of course, submitted fraudulent bank records or fake federal tax forms. Some of those loan applications were submitted on behalf of companies that the defendants, in this case, these people will be defendants, controlled. So they then laundered a portion of this money by writing checks from companies that receive PPP loans to fake employees. So those that were receiving these checks included some of the fraudsters and their relatives that we were able to track down. The fake paychecks, it just gets better and better, were then cashed at a cash checking company that one of the fraudsters owned. So they didn't even try to do it at something different. They tried to pocket it all. So there were over 1,100 fake paychecks totaling more than $3 million in fraudulent PPP loan proceeds that were cashed at this guy's business. We executed 45 seizure warrants in conjunction with this case. And some of the items seized are what you see here on the slide. A nice Porsche and a Lamborghini purchased with the illegally obtained funds. Just so you know what happens to these things once we seize them, Mike Ware gets to drive them if they're a Lamborghini. Just kidding. Of course, that doesn't happen. I wish that was the rule. Somebody needs to, one of y'all need to run for Senate or something and put that in the rules. That'd be great. But regarding this case though, I was quoted in saying something that I really believe, right, guys? This is a critical time for our nation's small businesses. It's right there on the slide. It is well known that fraudsters prey upon those in vulnerable positions. And as this result shows, SBA, OIG, and its law enforcement partners are actively working to bring these people that do this stuff, bring them to justice. And that's something that I wholeheartedly believe, man. When you roll with the mission at the forefront of your actions, which is getting much needed funds to the American public who are in desperate need of these funds, right, is very important. And that's what's driving our agency forward currently. because our auditors and investigators are deeply vested and deeply rooted in that mission. And to have this type of stuff happen with the regularity in which it's happening, pisses us off, for lack of a better way to put it. I couldn't come up with anything IG-like to say there other than pisses us off.
I'm sure that you would be shocked to hear that I use much sharper language with the students in class when it is not being recorded.
That's about as sharp as I'm gonna get today. If you want to hear sharper than that, meet me on the golf course. Anyway, look, man, but you can see, right? Again, even in this one, we weren't alone in this, right? So we work with the FBI on this. We work with Secret Service on this, with multiple partners that bring this type of stuff to bear. Now, what I want you to understand is that normally financial crimes take years to manifest and years to finalize. Ask David, he was AIGI, in terms of investigative effort, years. We are ahead of that pace by leaps and bounds. How? The whole of government approach that I started out with. Soon after the PPP applications began processing, we worked with the Department of Justice Fraud Section to develop the Department of Justice CARES Act project. So the main coordination efforts for that have to do with us, of course, the FBI, IRS criminal investigations, the United States Postal Service, what do you call them? I think they're investigation service, right? FDIC, FHFA, and that's the reason these cases have developed so quickly. And there are many more investigations related to PPP and EIDL ongoing by our law enforcement partners. And they include people like the FBI, the IRS, TIGTA, HHS, many others. So, I mean, we're definitely not in this alone. In just a couple months ago, I took part in a National Department of Justice press conference where we announced that 57 people had been charged related to PPP fraud from the Department of Justice criminal section alone, not included charges by local U.S. attorneys' offices. And at the time that we got there, just to show you how pervasive this stuff is, we were there to mark the 50th arrest. By the time we get up to speak, it was up to 57. So it's just the way it's been rolling. We've already seen, well, so far for my office, we already have over 50 indictments and 9 convictions, and already pulled back 125 million just for us alone. But in concert with the other law enforcement agencies, we've already seized over 450 million in more than 15,000 fraudulent EIDL loans. That number goes up every single day. And that's only the very...
And this is why, though, but you know, it's not in the control of the inspectors general. It's in control of the agencies that they oversee. This is why if we had prevented the loans from going out to begin with, it's much easier to prevent the horse from getting out of the barn than chasing them around when they're in the pasture or when they hop the fence and they're roaming around.
Right. But and every time I speak on this, when I speak on this before Congress, there's always some representatives or senators, depending on which type of hearing it is, that talk about the need for speed.
Yeah, no, it's a balancing act between the pressure to get the money out the door and implementing the controls.
I got to tell you though, David, right? And I always say this, I say this in these forums. How much more time would it have taken? How much more time? It wouldn't take weeks.
I'd say 1 week or 2 weeks at the max to use best practices. And just that 1 or 2 weeks, I think probably would have reduced a lot.
But guys, what we're talking about right now, it's important to know. It's only the very tip of the iceberg. Investigations are occurring in almost real time. And that normally doesn't happen, right? So we have a long road ahead of us. But I figured this class...
And a good long statute of limitations. So nothing is going to prevent this from going on for years afterwards.
Right. And the fraud is going to continue to manifest itself as is normal in the course of fraud review. and criminal investigations. You know, for PPP, the fraud it comes like primarily by false statements, like I spoke about in that one case, right? Because the banks are more accustomed to dealing with SBA's guaranteed lending programs. And they've been incredible partners, quite honestly, in terms of quickly reporting suspected fraud to our office. Yes, they're bad actors even within the banks, as evidenced by the firings of employees at 2 prominent banks recently. Not sure if you guys were aware of that, but bank employees were also fraudulently obtaining these loans. And a bunch of them too, a bunch of them got fired. But here's how that looks. And I have a slide for that. So you can see the fraudster sends in a fraudulent application based on inflated numbers of employees, fake addresses, etc., to the bank, just like the case that I just told you about. The bank then requests the loan approval from SBA. SBA approves that request. And then the fraudster gets a guaranteed loan from the bank with hopes it may even be forgiven. Better yet, they may go out of business. They were never in business, but they'll say that they went out of business, right? And then they buy Rolexes, Lamborghinis, airplanes. Well, some have. And those are some of the more interesting ones that I didn't go over. But that's the type of thing that we're finding folks buying, and property. And they quickly too, man. Like they just got that loan. Like tomorrow they have the Rolexes. Anyway, within the EIDL program though, that level of fraud is far more pervasive. The level of fraud is far more pervasive. So what we're seeing is a lot of identity theft. I mean, we're trying to put our arms around the full numbers. We're pulling that together as we speak, but identity theft is off the chain. And that's
where are they getting the identities from? Is this where it's starting to hook in with HHS, OIG, where they're doing the fake medical applications?
This is what we start to find out, which is when we start to partner. We start to find out that the same type of dudes who they were finding over there, they were like, you know what? They don't stop at one type of fraud. I bet you they have a PPP loan as well. Lo and behold, bam, they have a PPP loan.
But so some of this they're getting the PII in the dark web, others of which they're doing another fraud to get the PII so they can then apply for the loan, pretending to be the other person.
Correct.
Are you seeing any synthetic identity theft where they're creating it?
That I can't speak to right now, but I could tell you this. The stories that we get on the hotline, and Mary, who's on the call, she's personally received some of these calls. They're heartbreaking in terms of the damage that that's doing to people, you know. But what the banks were seeing, what the banks put us onto, was the banks did what we thought SBA should do immediately, right? When this money started to hit the banks, particularly the advanced grant program that I didn't speak about. Just about anybody could have gotten a $10,000 grant that it's a grant, you don't have to pay it back, anything like that. And that's where people really went in on the fraud. So this money started to hit the bank, and because it was $10,000, the bank has to ask some questions. So they start to find out that the account holders were unable to even explain where the money came from or identify the business name that was on the loan. So then they start to come in, and when the bank asked a follow-up question, they would say, oh, we don't know. We were told that the government was giving this money away and we could keep $8,000 and we have to give this guy $2,000 at the back end. So, I mean, it was that obvious. And so there were a lot of unwitting participants in this, where they're like, they just didn't know. They thought the government, this is what they were approached with. The government is just giving money away, you know? So with the banks hitting us with those, we were able to stop a lot of that. And then account holders, they were claiming to use the funds to open a business. Well, your business was supposed to have been opened already. And then the immediate transfer of funds to foreign accounts, to investment accounts. So as soon as they started to do that, the money was held. And that's when we started to get all these contacts. And this is what we were seeing. So one surefire way to know that a fraudster is involved is when we seize the money. So now we're seizing, let's say we've seized recently. I told you about the 450 million. Let's talk about that. seized it. Nobody came forward to ask a question as to why their money was seized. Nobody. If you were legitimate or a dumb criminal, perhaps, you might come to find out why your money is seized and make a big stink about getting it. But that didn't happen. But there's just a whole lot of that. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll talk a little bit more about some of the fraud schemes that we found on social media, because we identified several organized fraud rings using social media to recruit applicants who split the advance money with ringleaders. That's how they got to what I was just telling you about. Not to mention the romance scams and social media things where they're persuading people to provide your PII to get free money. And of course, then they use that PII for fraud. But I mean, they even had companies out there advertising their ability to secure SBA money for clients to start businesses, mind you, and then use that information to apply for the bigger loans as well. There were even online videos on social media that were readily available that we saw, instructing potential applicants how to answer certain questions falsely to obtain this loan money. You know, and of course, our audit and investigative work all come together with the assistance of our data analytics unit to find a lot of this. But some of our work addresses issues that require immediate attention to directly assist the American public in a different way. And I've spoken a lot about the fraud and everything else, but there are other things that IG offices do. Our first report on the Paycheck Protection Program came as a spin-off to ongoing work in response to, well, a letter signed by Senators Schumer, Cardin, and Brown. And they had some questions that we thought I was gonna have to respond to their letter anyway. So I figured we have this information, we're on the way to doing this, let's put it out publicly in the form of a report for everyone, not just for these senators. But at that time, we found that although most of the information, that the final rules and everything else that they put out aligned with the CARES Act, there were some critical areas where it didn't align, like the prioritization of underserved and rural markets, for one. Like what loan proceeds were going to be eligible for forgiveness was, for one. They came up way short on what Congress said should be eligible, things like that. So that's by far, that's not as sexy as the fraud findings, but don't miss the impact of this. The information presented in that was the first in the nation on CARES Act funding, by the way, resulted in direct amendments in the law prior to the second tranche of funding that came out by SBA, specifically to address our recommendations. And those things were implemented to benefit the American public ravaged by the economic impact of the pandemic. So you see the impact of an Inspector General of the office is more than just fraud detection and fraud prevention. It is also the impact that we could make in the way laws are created in this country to affect small businesses. You know, not as sexy, but kind of cute. You know, it's really good. And I'll be honest, that's one of the best results for auditors and investigators and analysts, when their work directly impacts the lives of people depending on the efficient performance of their programs. That's another, you know, unique and rewarding role that we play. So to date, we've already issued seven reports, I think. Got 9 more in progress, about 3 more about to come out just any day now. And we're gonna remain focused. I mean, we're all hands on deck in terms of providing the oversight of these funds. And if it seems like a lot, guys, it's because it is. There's a lot at stake, and we're only at the tip of the iceberg in terms of our oversight posture on this. And look, I think I'll wrap up at that point. Thank you very much once again for having me be a part of your class. And now would be a great time to ask any questions that you have. About
the, you said there were like 9 loan agencies that reported fraud. Is that how you get the start of your investigations, by the banks, I guess, reporting the fraud? Or is there another way that you get the start of your investigations for all these? Remember that there was a 10,000% increase in our hotline complaints.
So as we started to get the hotline complaints, right, and we started to have access to SBA's data, which we do, we use data analytics, overlaid that with the complaints that we're getting. So using even more analysis. Remember, I told you the importance of being able to understand that data that you're analyzing. On top of it, the stuff from the bank, it just all started to fill out. And then we were able to move from there. In addition, how SBA is set up, they have district offices across all 50 states. And then they have that disaster lending program that I spoke about early, that I have a group in Dallas. And they're filled with lawyers there who review a lot of these things. And as they found things that looked fishy, they just kept passing them to us. I mean, it's in the thousands what they have passed on to us. Reagan, you were gonna say something?
Yeah, I was just curious if you guys are like going after more of like individuals, or is it more just like organizations and businesses that are committing fraud, or is it like
both? But mostly for now, what we've been going after most that you're seeing in the press are individuals. I mean, to move this quickly, you're gonna find the ones that, I mean, there wasn't that difficult to find. You know, it takes a lot of work to pull it in, but once you're on it, it's not that difficult. Listen, the way that this affected people on the front end. Remember when in 14 days the money on Paycheck protection program was done. 14 days, $300-something billion is gone. Nobody knew at that point whether there was going to be a second tranche of funding. So
that some of the people who were affected were people who never got the opportunity to apply because the fraudsters took their money. Right. So one may argue, yeah, but there's still money in that program. You never even knew there was going to be more money in that program. Even more the reason why you should ensure that there's integrity in your programs. Hey, here's the thing. We need new blood. That's learning. I mean, our people, they're required, our auditors and investigators, everybody, auditors, investigators, analysts, they're required to have 80 hours of continuing professional education every 2 years. And so they're on top of the latest things. Individual development plans are mandatory within my organization. So they get a hand in determining what training they're gonna get in order to be on top, because we want the best of the best working for us. And you know, if that means you, then let's go, let's get it. If the pandemic is over, you know, and good Lord willing, it will be, I will come and visit you at SBA headquarters. And, you know, we're only 2.5, 3 hours away here at this school. And we are the program in the University System of Maryland that has the fraud program. So we would be delighted to send these students to you.
And I'll be more than happy.
And I mean, with a professor from the IG community teaching them.
That's right. That's right.
So I want to, if you guys would just briefly take your mutes off to give a round of applause and thank you to Inspector General Ware for visiting with us and taking the time in the middle of truly the most extraordinary time of our lives to talk to you guys about what his office does. And
I think I'm gonna need a drink after this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. I haven't heard applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that what I've said, particularly as relates to our mission, and I mean, we're not the only one with a great mission, right? The great missions across government. You know, HHS has a great mission. NASA has a great mission. I mean, everybody. But when this resonates with you and you tie that to what you're learning currently and the field that you've chosen to pursue, you can see why giving government service a shot, you know what I mean? Even at the very beginning, should be something you consider. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.